Hey guys, got a couple more stories for you. These ones are all about finding strange things in the woods, whether they be people or otherwise. I even found one that doesn't quite take place in the woods, but it was a fun read anyway, so I thought I'd share it with you. It's from a forum back in 1999. I'll never stop thinking how cool it is of finding all these ghost stories from way back in the day. If you like what you hear today, feel free to click the like button. If you're not a fan, feel free to dislike it. I don't mind. Also, just gonna plug my Twitter in one more time. If you like all things horror, especially VHS inspired, feel free to check out the link below. We're almost at 1,300 followers, which is crazy to me. But I've been putting in a lot of work trying to get it looking like a Twitter I'd like to follow. I like the idea of just scrolling through and finding different horror movies that might interest me, or if I'm looking for something to watch, have screenshots of different fun scenes from different movies, if that makes sense. But yeah, click on the link, maybe give me a follow, say hi. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into the stories. Back when I was about 16, me and about 20 other people rented a cabin out in the woods. This was March and during spring break, so we planned on staying out there for 4 or 5 days at least. The cabin itself was surrounded on all sides by woods. To the west, there were some hunting trails and a creepy abandoned trailer next to a small clearing with a single pine tree in the middle. To the east of the cabin, if you hike through the woods a bit, you'd come out to a large open field. At the end of this field, there was another slope leading down to a beach. When going down the slope to the right, there was a bit of a higher elevation, and to the right of this, there was a valley that could be accessed from the beach. Anyways, on the last night, a group of about 8 of us decided we'd go down to the beach and sit around while playing guitars and singing songs. It was about 11 p.m., and everything was going fine until 3 of the guys decided to head back to the cabin to get some food. They were gone for only 10 minutes before one of the guys got a call from his brother. His reaction to the call made it seem like something happened or someone was hurt. When he got off the phone, he just said, "We have to leave right now," in a very hushed, panicked voice. We all asked why, and he told us that while the others were walking back, they found a rabbit at the top of the trail with its head cut clean off. Not ripped off like an animal or something, but cut like someone took a knife to the rabbit. We automatically thought, they just gotta be fucking with us. So we began walking back, brandishing the guitar and a metal pipe as a weapon in case they really weren't messing with us. About halfway up the hill, we hear rustling and twigs snapping to our right where the valley is. It sounded like someone was walking up the side of the very steep slope. We told them to knock it off, and that if it's a joke, it's not funny. The movement to the right stopped very suddenly. We kept going, and once we neared the top of the hill, I turned on the phone's flashlight, and right on the ground in front of me lay the rabbit. We took off running and heard something run out of the woods. We didn't stop running until we got back to the cabin. We found all the guys sitting inside. We locked up every door and all the windows. Me and 2 of the other guys stayed up all night to keep watch and make sure whatever it was didn't follow us back to the cabin. We all fell asleep around 6:30 a.m. and woke up around 8 to someone freaking out about the decapitated rabbit head laying on the front porch in front of the door. We don't know what was going on that night, but we got out of there that day and never went back. So, this happened to me when I was about 12, maybe 13. For background, I live in a boring-ass subdivision full of mansions and soccer moms. For the most part, nothing remotely creepy's ever happened to me here, save for two somewhat notable occasions. The first time, to the side of my neighborhood is a little patch of forest. I should clarify, my entire neighborhood is surrounded by forest, but almost all of it is watershed land, which is entirely off limits and fenced off. This little patch of forest to the side isn't watershed though, and so my friends and I would often go here. There's train tracks running next to this area as well, which were just about the shadiest area of my town. And by shady I mean a few petty weed deals would go down every so often here. A homeless guy also lived in this little forested strip, which we were somehow fascinated by. The point is, I guess, that this place has somewhat of a reputation for being a shady area, at least to my 12-year-old self. So one day, I went out with my friends to shoot airsoft guns at each other. We got near the forest and somehow got split up. I assumed that we were trying to play some kind of airsoft game, but I'm really not sure anymore. Either way, I headed into the forest while my friends stayed in the pre-development area of the subdivision just outside of the neighborhood. Upon entering the forest, I was greeted with a fairly intense rotten stench. I've smelt dead animals before, admittedly only small ones, but this was far worse. It freaked me out a bit, and I instantly wondered if I was smelling a human or not. I somehow continued into the forest, my rational brain still managing to keep myself convinced that this was almost certainly just a dead animal, a deer or a moose or something. But when I got to the end of the makeshift trail, I saw it. A few feet off the trail, there was a large blue tarp draped over the ground, and right next to it, in the center of the trail, a large pool of bloody water. The puddle is maybe 3 feet wide, a few inches deep, and an intensely bright crimson-red color. So I instantly decided to just book it back home and call the cops. But right before I did, I noticed something shiny in the water. A lot of shiny things. They were bones. Tiny bones. The puddle was filled with fish skeletons. After looking closer, I could see that the puddle is entirely filled with mostly decomposed fish. And under the tarp, there was a larger pile of less decomposed fish. Thank God, I thought. No body. Then, me being a hilarious 12-year-old that I was, I decided to find my friend and attempt to convince him that I had found a body because, pranks. Later on in that year, I was out riding bikes with a small group of friends in the evening. We were by a lake that's very close to our neighborhood, and this place is full of more upscale properties with docks and lake views. But regardless of that, we loved to ride through it, not for the scenic value, but because it was a quick way to get to a nearby convenience store where we would load up on candy. As we rode through the area, we noticed a guy standing on his porch way ahead of us. He was staring at us, quite intently in fact. We looked at each other and made some joke about how creepy this guy was, but we didn't think too much of it. As we rode past his house, however, he yelled out something to the effect of, "Hey, wait." So we stopped for some reason. The man walked up to us and just kind of looked at us for a second. And then he said something like, "Stay here, I got something for you." And then he hurried back into his house. We sat there uncomfortably for probably about a minute or so before one of my friends said, "Creepy." To which I responded, "Yeah." After about another minute or so, I suggested that we just bail, but we didn't, and ended up sitting there for another few minutes before finally his door opened. I don't quite know what I expected. Was he going to kidnap us? Was he coming out with a weapon? Whatever he had his mind on, it was some of the weirdest social behavior I've ever seen at the time. So he steps out of his door, no gun thankfully, but instead he's carrying a plastic bag. He walks up and hands it to us. The thing is filled with wheels, skateboard wheels and scooter wheels. He explained that his kid moved out and had all these extra wheels and thought we might want them. Then he just looked at us for a moment as if expecting some kind of conversation to ensue. But we just thanked him and uncomfortably rode away. The weird thing was how strange and ham-fisted his explanation was when he told us about his kid. For that matter, it was really strange how he just stopped us in the street so he could grab some skateboard wheels. It was a weird experience overall, and after that we always kind of avoided that house as best as we could. It seems like he might have just been lonely. With what he said, it seemed like his kids were gone and he was all alone there. We were nervous and scared at the time, but we did get some pretty nice wheels out of it. I remember when this happened. I was about 16 at the time and living in a very rural part of Montana. I lived near the Clark Fork River at the time, and I loved to frequent that area in the evening. My mom, although opposed to the idea of me walking alone, especially through the old but short hiking trail in the evening, didn't really think that there was much threat besides wild animals like raccoons or possums, so she let me. We were rather secluded after all. I remember there was something very therapeutic to just walk along the riverbank and listen to the river run. I loved to do this a lot, until I saw a man in the woods. I remember the whole incident very clearly. My day had gone just like any other. I came home from school, stressed out. I worked on my homework and got it all done. I ate dinner and afterwards, my favorite part of the day, my evening walk. Everything seemed so normal. Walking along the riverbank, listening to the river, decompressing from my day, when out in the distance I heard a rustling from up the tree line. I didn't think much of it at first, although now that I'm thinking about it, I should have paid more attention, rather than thinking it was just some squirrel or other animal. I continued walking, not really paying much attention to anything besides the water. What once was lovely orange and lavender sky was now dark, hazy blue. I decided I needed to start heading home, so I turned around and started back up the trail that would have taken me home, when I started to hear the rustling again. It was a bit closer, but still very far off. I pressed forward, although my gut told me to just find another way. I ignored it. I told myself that I was just frightened, and that there's no way anyone at this hour would be out here. While walking with a decent amount of speed through the trail, I found the rustling kept getting closer and closer, like it was moving, but it wasn't wind. That's when I heard it. A blood-curdling scream that was too close for comfort. It sounded like a man's mixed with something not quite human. With the taste of fear in my mouth and my stomach dropping to the floor, I was too scared to move. I didn't want whatever it was to see me, let alone hear me walking. I surveyed the area, thinking it could just be a fox or a coyote. Off the trail a little bit was a very dark figure. It was hard to see, but I could make out that it was a person's outline. There was something about it that just wasn't quite right. It screeched again, and after it was done, that's when I felt it make eye contact with me. I booked it out of there. From what I heard, it was behind me, keeping a good pace chasing me. But with adrenaline on my side, I didn't stop running until I was all the way home. I burst through the door, breathing heavier than I ever had in my life. I don't know what I'd just seen, but it was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. This last one doesn't quite take place in the woods, but I thought it was fun anyways. Think of it as a little bonus. It's the one I found that was from 1999, and it's called Fresh Coffee. So the story happened to an uncle of mine back in 1971. At the time, he was living in an old house on the corner of Jackson and Elm Street in Noonan, Georgia. He was living alone at the time because he and my aunt had separated. Now, most of the time, my uncle was a meticulous housekeeper, but admittedly, there were times when he'd get a little lazy and leave his kitchen a mess overnight after eating supper. On one such occasion, after eating supper, he piled his dirty dishes into the sink, left the countertop a mess, and went to bed, intending to clean the kitchen up the next morning before leaving for work. That morning, when he got up, not only was the kitchen clean, but there was also a fresh pot of coffee brewed and a fresh cup poured. And I mean fresh. The cup of coffee was steaming as if it had just been poured only seconds before. Thinking maybe my aunt came by, he called out to her. No one answered. He looked out towards the driveway to see if he could see her car, but it wasn't there. Wondering how she could have gotten in so quick, he shrugged it off, picked up the coffee, and decided he'd just call her later and ask why she left. That evening, when he got in from work, he called her to find out why she left and to thank her for cleaning his kitchen. She told him that she hadn't been there this morning, nor any other time since she left. Knowing that it couldn't have been anybody else, he asked her why she was lying to him, and she just reiterated that she had not been there. My uncle, becoming annoyed, quickly snapped back on the phone. Well, I don't know why you're lying, but I can do my own housework. Don't come back here cleaning unless you intend to come home. Having said this, he hung up the phone on her. Later that evening, he fixed himself some supper, again leaving the kitchen a mess. Once again, when he got up the next morning, the kitchen was clean, the coffee brewed, and a fresh cup poured. Well, if she wants to come over here and clean up for me and make me coffee, he thought, that's fine, but I'll be damned if I call her and thank her again for it. My uncle skipped making the bed that morning and just left for work. When he returned home later in the day, the bed was made. Growing uncomfortable with the situation, he called my aunt and asked her to please tell him that she'd been there this morning or any other time during that day. She promised him she'd not been there at all since they separated. She asked him if he'd even considered that this could have something to do with the ring we found downstairs in the old toolbox, the ring which kept mysteriously disappearing from the headboard every night. He reconsidered what my aunt had said to him about the old ring. My uncle began to wonder if maybe she was right about something being in the house that was living with them, something that my uncle didn't understand. That night, before going to bed, he set his clock to an hour earlier than usual, hoping to get up in time to catch my aunt in the act of cleaning the kitchen and making the coffee. He woke up before the alarm went off, and he could hear movement in the kitchen. He crept quietly out of the bed and tiptoed out of his room. He could distinctly hear the sound of running water in the kitchen and the sound of dishes tapping together, the way they sound when they're being put away in the cupboard. Just before reaching the doorway where he could see into the kitchen, the running water stopped, as did any other movement. He flipped on the light and saw nothing, except for a clean kitchen, fresh brewed coffee, and a fresh cup poured for him. Admittedly, he was shaken. Not touching the cup of coffee, he quickly turned and went back to his room, got ready for work, and left the house. He didn't spend another night there. Instead, he rented a motel room and lived there until he could find a new house a few days later. Well, I hope you enjoyed. Maybe you'll think twice next time you're biking around an unfamiliar neighborhood and an old man starts running up to you. Stick around long enough, he might give you something nice. I was out in town earlier and found some magazines that I thought might be interesting for the channel. They're from the 70s, and they're called UFO Report and UFO Annual. And they're full of reports that people have mailed into the magazine back in the day. And if you guys are interested, I thought it might be fun to read one or two of them in a video sometime. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for sticking around. Have a good night. Bye.